according to our resource book, Cliff Moten, and even a bit of Lagro Jr. say that recent developments in urban design have been lacking or not as good as the pre-industrial area, meaning it's no longer designed for people but for production. Our environment, like our built environment, has like taken people from like the main design users to like the secondary uh, the secondary users of our buildings. For us architects, I think even now we can feel it. We're not designing for the community as much. We're just designing for the client because we are constrained in a way, or we have to really bend over backwards for the client because they're the one paying us. We it's hard to say no to someone who's like basically holding all of the power. And then this kind of design is not sustainable, and it also has a lot of tragedies. Like one of the most famous urban design failures is the 1950s Pruitt-Igoe project. So it's a affordable or like a socialized housing complex that was built in the 1950s and then demolished by the 1960s. So it only was around for 10 years. There's a lot of factors that go into why it succeeded, and then who basically holds the blame for the Pruitt-Igoe development project. So Pruitt-Igoe project. And there's a documentary for it. It's called over here, the Pruitt-Igoe myth. I think I can see, you can find trailers of it online and you get the gist of it. But me personally, I haven't like gone through the documentary. I just read the details of this project. So this is what it looks like. So just looking at this image here, you can see the stark contrast between the housing development and the surrounding area. And I think I'll also load up the map here so we have more context. Development. Let's go to maps. So this is in Pruitt-Igoe is the name of the site, and it's located in St. Louis, Missouri. So this is, let me zoom out a bit more, in sort of the middle part of the US. So a bit more kanang temperate na climate, a bit warmer than the other states. And if we go down again, let's take a look at the site. So currently the buildings are no longer there. They were demolished in the 1960s. And just looking at the area, it's very kanang urbanized. You have a lot of, I think these are single detached homes. Yeah, they're single detached homes. Some of them are duplexes. So the lots are kanang equally divided. You can see there's a grid pattern here. So you can say this is a fairly kanang affluent neighborhood. As we can see, the grid pattern is very consistent all throughout. You have, I think the center is here where St. Louis, the name of St. Louis is hovering above. So this is the commercial area, and all of these spaces behind, let me just highlight that. You have the Mississippi River over here, and then you have the residential areas over here, over here, over here, and then the commercial areas are over here. So the Pruitt-Igoe development was located closer to the kanang, basically the areas of work, like commercial areas, offices. So just from a site selection point of view, it seems to be a good idea. So site selection most likely isn't the issue. Now, if you look at the buildings themselves, design-wise, they look like they're workable. They're supposed to be kanang a bit more on the lower budget or the more affordable end. So I think these forms are, from an architectural perspective, they're decent looking. They're not amazing, but they're passable. So if it's not in the location of the site, it's not in the design of the building, where is the fault? Or where did they go wrong? Now, based on my research, what happened was they designed this building with the users, with the target market of low-income workers, but the amenities of the buildings themselves were more catered to high-income or kanang, um, if I may say, the buildings were designed with predominantly kanang for the use of white, I guess white people, but the actual people who live here were kanang uh, the impoverished colored races, or I guess I just have to say kanang black people. So there's like a bit of a bias there. Na they were expecting the target market to behave in a certain way, but the actual target market was different from what they had in mind. So the spaces are, we don't have floor plans here. Basically, what I'm trying to say is the spaces weren't aligned with the actual target demographic. And then there were also a few kanang um, management issues na they were thinking with these a lot of these socialized projects na the government will pay for the initial cost and then the maintenance cost will be handled by the people who live in it. So what happened was the impoverished communities who lived in this, of course, they wanted better quality housing, so they moved in. But the people who lived here never really sort of got out of poverty because of like racial discrimination, other kind of cultural factors. Now, the fact that during this time, 1950s, 1960s, there were still a lot of kanang negative connotations. I think even today, it still persists like a bit of kanang, or not a bit, but racism is still prevalent in the US. So basically, what happened was a lot of these like poor communities, poor Black people, got here, and then instead of like uplifting each other, because the environment doesn't really have a lot of communal space, everyone is sort of forced into these like towers. There's some parks here, pro mostly given to parking. Playgrounds were supposed to be given here, but like I think wala na push to on playground, so people were forced to they didn't have a lot of gathering spaces. There was a school here, so kanang they didn't communicate or they didn't really have spaces to get to know their neighbors. So what happened was um, the buildings became more and more kanang derelict or kanang derelict kanang it wasn't properly maintained. It didn't really uplift the area because what do you call this? It only attracted people of a quote unquote bad character and not much kanang mixing of different sort of communities. So basically, this is where one group of kanang uh, one very kanang minor group of people were living here and they weren't exposed to anyone else. So it became sort of like a like negative cycle where people would move in here impoverished and they would get even more impoverished because like the community around them like didn't support them or they were uh, basically closed off. So what happened was all the poor people moved here and they weren't given as much opportunities as those who lived outside the Pruitt Igo development because they had like their own school. The idea was the reason why they have their own schools, they don't have to travel far, but a lot of like factors didn't really come together. So they it became like mismanaged as well. So they had to demolish it. So long story short, even if we have a very good kanang design objective, like well-meaning planners envision an affordable mid-rise apartment complex, unfortunately, the design process was done with a top-bottom approach, meaning the designers didn't really directly consult the community. They just designed it with kind of white people in mind, but the target demographic was actually kind of Black people, and they didn't kind of consider what their needs were. And for the residents, it felt like they never really got comfortable or felt at home in the Pruitt Igo projects. So that's why it like came down. So going down here, the declining economic fortunes of St. Louis, the resulting impact upon employment opportunities, and the project's failure to meet occupancy projections from the start, and therefore to not it couldn't meet monthly income projected to cover maintenance costs. Furnaces made to incinerate garbage failed, pipes, plumbing failed, and more issues kept on to the point that residents stopped paying rent. So they had a population number, for example, like 100,000, but they only got 10,000. So nobody could pay for the maintenance costs. And then the buildings were obviously no longer maintained. Some ideas here, some notes here. Physical factors that weren't uh, very well considered. The buildings were too big and the estimated density was too high. So these buildings, there were total 33 buildings with 11 stories each. And because they overestimated the sizes of the buildings, the price of construction and maintenance would be too expensive to be affordable. And as a result, the facilities as well, like during opening day, were of low quality. And then a social factor would be there was limited user-tenant participation. The tenants were almost exclusively from the lower income demographic. And then contemporary theories of urban design say there should be a mix. So it shouldn't just be all low income people. There should be middle income people and also some spaces for even high income people. So it must be attractive for a mix of uses and not just a single demographic. So some other quotes here that I'll just read for the sake of the recording. In their eagerness to challenge the Pruitt-Igoe myth, this is for the movie, it suggests that the design of the buildings had nothing to do with the failure that ensured. So your design could be perfect, but the project could still fail. So some notes here. Critics of high modernism can point to the counterexample of Carr Square Village, if you want to look at that, a low-rise housing project in 1942 built across the street but didn't suffer from Pruitt-Igoe's escalating vacancy rates and crime. I think it also has to do with the scale of the building, really. And then this is where analytical scale of participation comes in. So this is from our reference book, what was it called? Urban Design Street and Square, which I will post in our Google Drive. So we have different levels of participation, and then this would depend on the complexity of your project. So if you're doing a master plan of any kind of development, so this master plan usually involves subdivision development, housing, and like a building complex, you would need to do public meetings, public inquiries, planning appeals, exhibitions, and like press releases. So you need to consult the local sort of community instead of just what do you call this? Manipulating them or just giving them like a small token in the, or like they're just announcing that project would happen and then they're not included in the project at all. So just a breakdown of this table. So at the top here, you have the different techniques of participation, levels of participation, political systems, spatial units, and mode of planning. And then 1 is the highest level or like the highest complexity or what do you call this? Most control, basically. So in techniques of participation, the highest is community administration, self-build, and community design, planning and design. So it's really the community who creates the plans and then also constructs the building. In the lowest level of community participation or techniques of participation, you have anthropological studies. So it's just like a few groups of people, like researchers looking at the community, user studies, and planning surveys. And in the middle, you have what I mentioned earlier, the press release, the exhibition space, planning appeals, public inquiries, and public meeting. And then on the side of level of participation, the highest is the most degree of citizen power. So really like having the public control the projects. You have citizen control, delegated power, and partnership with whoever's constructing that project. So we have something similar to public-private partnership that could also fall into that place. And then the next level is degrees of tokenism. So tokenism is when you just have one person there. Like for example, in a I guess in a group meeting, and you're supposed to represent different values. Like for example, in your group work, like in your group works before, if you have different topics, for example, two persons for one topic, and then like another two persons for another topic, but then there's only one person for one topic, something like that. So basically giving a quote unquote token person to represent a large group. So what will happen is whoever is present in that consultation, that meeting, um, if they have lesser representation, that they're basically a token figure, something like that. And then the least level of participation is non-participation. So you're manipulating them and you're just giving them like, sorry, we're doing this, and like just informing them of what will be happening as a project. So that's the lowest level. Political systems here. I'm not super sure why anarchy is number one. So I guess that's just kanang the level of kanang government control. So anarchy is like no government control. So bahala na mo, kamo na design, kamo na build. I think that's what's happening. There's also like you can have too much liberty. So that's what's happening with our squatter areas. It's not regulated. It's up to the people there. Now we have here the second level, which is a democratic government-like system. You have the ideal sort of political system would be a participatory democracy. So people coming together, voting, consulting, discussing, and then the next level to that is representative democracy. So you have a community, let's say one barangay, you have the barangay captain who will speak for the needs of the barangay to the mayor or to like the higher government authority. And then down here is the least public control, totalitarian, or the least kanang citizen control, the totalitarian government, meaning dictatorship. So we had this like during the Marcos era, some communist states practiced like totalitarian government. You also have like North Korea, I think more famous. So the political system moves from total government control to no government control, which the Moten describes as anarchy. Then over here, we have spatial units. So we have the highest spatial unit or the largest spatial unit usually handled by the government is the national level. Then you have the regional level, the city or municipal level, the town or barangay level, and even smaller than the town, you have the district quarter. Yeah, and then even smaller than that, you have the neighborhood, then finally the street, and then the home or the single lot. And then even smaller than that is the room, maybe a room in the apartment. And then in modes of planning, you have the highest level, like for urban and regional planning, you have master planning. For like city planning, they call it structure planning. Here in the Philippines, we just call everything master planning. So there's no sort of division. Everything is just called master planning, which has some benefits, but I think some kind of metric would be useful for us as well. You have mixed scanning, incremental planning, action plans, and then the highest level of citizen control, no plan. So bahala na citizens, no government intervention, something like that. So this is basically kind of how community planning is handled. It's either full government control or no government control. The ideal scenario would be somewhere in the middle. And then what kind of mode of planning will be done depends really on how big that project is. So the ideal modes and techniques are highlighted here with the hatching. But what's commonly done is highlighted here in the kanang broken line. So according to Moten here, this is the ideal techniques of participation and modes of planning. But this one is in broken line here. This is the more commonly practiced. So you can still get the ideal mixed scanning here, but it's a bit more messy in real life. Well, all projects are messy in real life because you have a lot of people working on one big project. Okay, so basic design elements or concepts. So we talked about this a bit in the, what do you call this, site planning book. We had You had unity, balance, and emphasis. Here, I think we can just compare the notes of Moten. What he calls unit, what Legros Jr. calls unity, Moten calls as order. So still has the same sort of basic principles. You have repetition, you have limiting of kanang palettes. So for me, I would combine order and unity into one. Um, just based on our discussions with Legros Jr. And then proportion, scale, rhythm, and harmony, I would fit that into kanang balance would be leans towards what Legros Jr. would call kanang sorry. Balance is what Moten would call proportion. Scale, rhythm, and harmony. This is just has to do with how do you create contrast. So these are two different ways of thinking of elements in design. One was from site planning, and this one is for urban design. So for urban design, we can describe order as the functional and aesthetic arrangement of the built form. So order and unity are very closely related. I made this like a year ago, but given after like a year of basically discussing this lecture, I would combine this both. But just to showcase the source material, I just kept them different in this module. So if you look at the definition, unity is the coming together, and then order is the functional and aesthetic arrangement of build form. This is another way of saying unity. So I think just review this for the quiz. I think there's a question there about unity, but when we get to that, maybe we'll check like the answers. And then proportion, similar to balance and contrast, just to show like interesting, to create interest in your composition. So again, the two big different what do you call this, balances or proportion, you have symmetrical or asymmetrical. And then to create contrast, you have some kind of hierarchy. So if everything is symmetrical in your composition, if you want to contrast something else or like an important element of your design, you make it asymmetrical or take it off the axis. So that would create some kind of contrast. Meanwhile, if you want to maintain like a simple traditional symmetrical layout, the scale, the rhythm, and harmony have to be similar. Okay. So let's do, oh, it's 11:05. We're doing a bit, I went a bit faster. Any questions so far? Let me just get a charger. Questions on basic urban design concepts. Designing for people, the levels of participation, and then the urban design elements. Questions? I guess no question. Gilang, ako lang mag-question ninyo. So you should be able to open the urban design quiz here. This would be available to both groups. Let me double check. I'm on group 2 module here. Let's look at the group 1 module. Go to modules. It should be this one here. So time limit is 3 minutes. You can only attempt it once, and I guess we'll spend the next like 30 minutes checking your answers. Okay.